We're taking the house, the cars, and all your savings, my son and ex-wife shockingly declared. My lawyer said, "We have no chance." I calmly replied, "I have a plan." At the final court hearing, I was completely composed, while their lawyer suddenly turned pale upon seeing that very document. Betrayal won't go unpunished. The consequences for them will be devastating. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. The wine bottle was still cold in my hands when my son told me I should die faster. "Dad, let's be realistic here," Adam said, leaning back in his chair at my dining table. "You're 64. You've got, what, maybe 15 good years left? Probably less with your stress levels." I set the Cabernet Sauvignon on the table, the same table I'd built with my own hands in 1999, back when this house was just studs and dreams. Sandra, my ex-wife, sat across from me, her manicured fingers wrapped around a glass of my whiskey. She hadn't poured herself one in the 8 years since our divorce. Tonight, apparently, was special. "What Adam means," Sandra said in that honeyed voice she used when she wanted something, "is that we've been thinking about the future. Your future. Our future." "Fascinating," I said. I didn't realize we had a shared future anymore. The divorce papers from 2017 suggested otherwise. Adam's jaw tightened. At 38, he still had the same look he'd had as a teenager when I caught him stealing 20s from my wallet. Defiant, entitled, convinced he deserved whatever he took. "That's exactly what we need to discuss." Sandra slid a manila envelope across the table. "We filed this morning." I didn't touch it. 30 years as an IRS auditor taught me that documents people slide toward you are never good news. Instead, I watched her face, the slight upturn of her lips, the way her eyes kept darting to Adam for reassurance. They'd rehearsed this, probably for weeks. "Filed what, exactly?" "A lawsuit," Adam said, unable to contain himself. "We're claiming the house, the cars, and half your retirement. Mom says you promised her everything during the divorce." I let that sentence hang in the air for a moment. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a 1934 Howard Miller I'd restored myself, ticked 11 times before I spoke. "I promised her everything," I repeated, "during the divorce, when we were dividing assets in front of lawyers and a judge." "You promised her privately," Adam said, "verbally. We have witnesses." Witnesses to a private conversation. 3 of them. Mom's friends were there. I looked at Sandra. She had the decency to avoid my eyes, staring instead at the whiskey she'd helped herself to. 8 years ago, I let her stay in this house, temporarily, because she said she had nowhere to go. 8 years of paying the mortgage on a property I couldn't live in. 8 years of watching my son move in with her, neither of them paying a dime in rent. The house is worth $847,000 now, Adam continued. The F-150 and the Accord together are worth about $52,000, and your IRS pension account has $312,000. We're only asking for half the pension. We think that's fair." "Fair," I said. "You're going to die eventually, Dad. Why make this difficult?" There it was, the thing I'd always suspected but never heard out loud. To my son, I was already a corpse, just one that hadn't stopped breathing yet. I stood up slowly, picked up the wine bottle I'd brought, and tucked it under my arm. "Kenneth," Sandra started, "please don't make a scene." "A scene?" I buttoned my jacket with deliberate calm. "Sandra, I've spent 30 years watching people lie about money. I've seen doctors hide offshore accounts, CEOs cry about expenses they invented, and small business owners swear their cash registers were broken for tax season. You know what all of them had in common? They all thought they were smarter than the paperwork." Sandra's face flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been doubt. But Adam stepped in, his chin jutting forward with that familiar arrogance. "You can't scare us with your IRS stories, Dad. This isn't a tax audit. This is family court. Different rules." "Rules?" I repeated, savoring the word. "You want to talk about rules? In the house I built, at the table I made with my own hands, while drinking my whiskey and demanding my money." Adam's smirk faltered, just slightly. "Good." I walked to the door, my door, the one I'd installed in 1987, and paused with my hand on the knob. "You'll hear from my lawyer," I said. "You don't have a lawyer," Adam called out. I checked. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I sat in my Ford F-150 for 20 minutes, watching the lights in the windows of the house I'd built. The house where I'd carried Sandra over the threshold. The house where Adam took his first steps. The house that, according to the envelope I still hadn't opened, no longer belonged to me. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I'd found a lawyer on Google earlier that week. Brian Mills, some young guy with a 3-star rating and reasonable rates. I'd hoped I wouldn't need him. I dialed. Mills Law Office, this is Brian. Mr. Mills, my name is Kenneth Watson. I believe I'm about to be in a significant amount of legal trouble. I explained the situation in the same methodical tone I'd used in thousands of audit interviews. The house, the alleged promise, the witnesses, the son who thought my death was taking too long. When I finished, the line was silent for nearly 30 seconds. Mr. Watson, Brian Mills finally said, I'll be honest with you. This is going to be a difficult case. Very difficult. The office of Brian Mills was exactly what a 3-star Google rating would suggest. A converted storage space above a dry cleaner, with a desk that wobbled and diplomas hung slightly crooked on wood-paneled walls. They're claiming you made an oral promise to transfer the house to Sandra in exchange for her not pursuing your federal pension. Brian pushed a stack of papers toward me. Dated July 15th, 2017. They have 3 witnesses willing to testify under oath. Diane Kowalski, Patricia Odom, and Ruth Finley, I read from the document. Sandra's book club friends. You know them? They've been lying for Sandra since before my marriage ended. Ruth told me to my face that Sandra was at her house the night I found hotel receipts in Sandra's coat pocket. I flipped to the next page. What's this second filing? Brian's face went a shade paler. Your son filed separately. He's claiming emotional distress and psychological damage from alleged mistreatment during his childhood. He's asking for $200,000 in damages. The number should have shocked me. Instead, I thought about a summer afternoon in 1994, when Adam was 7 years old. We'd been at Zilker Park, just the 2 of us. He wanted ice cream, and I'd said he had to finish his sandwich first. Standard parenting. He threw the sandwich into the duck pond and announced he hated me. I bought him the ice cream anyway. I bought him everything anyway. The car when he was 16, the apartment deposit when he was 22, the business loan of $12,000 when he was 29, which he'd never mentioned again. Mr. Watson? Brian was staring at me. Combined total? $1.2 million, give or take. He straightened the papers that didn't need straightening. I have to be honest with you, sir. This isn't my area of expertise. Family law, property disputes. I mostly handle DUIs and minor contract issues. You need someone with more experience? You're telling me you can't help. I'm telling you I don't know how to fight this. He looked genuinely sorry, which was almost worse than if he'd been indifferent. We don't have a chance, Mr. Watson. Not against these claims. Not with witnesses. I'm sorry. I drove to my temporary apartment, a 1-bedroom unit on South Lamar that cost $1,850 a month. I'd rented it 2 years ago when the atmosphere at the house became unbearable. Sandra's passive-aggressive comments about her space, making every visit feel like trespassing in my own property. The apartment was sparse. A couch, a television I rarely watched, and a folding table I used as a desk. I'd brought my laptop and my files. Decades of financial records I'd kept out of professional habit. I sat down and opened the laptop. Numbers never lie. People lie constantly, creatively, and with tremendous confidence. But numbers, if you follow them carefully, will always tell you the truth. I started with Sandra's filing. July 15th, 2017, the date of the alleged oral promise. I pulled up my calendar from that year, a digital copy I'd synced from my old IRS computer. July 15th, 2017, National Tax Conference, Dallas, Hyatt Regency. I remembered that conference. 3 days of presentations about updated audit procedures, rubber chicken dinners, and a hotel room with a view of nothing. I'd kept the receipts, of course. I kept every receipt. 30 years of auditing teaches you that documentation is the difference between winning and losing. On July 15th, 2017, at the exact moment I supposedly promised Sandra my house, I was 200 miles away, checking into a hotel in Dallas. 3 witnesses were prepared to swear I was somewhere I couldn't have been. I leaned back in my chair and felt something I hadn't felt in days. A smile. The clock on my laptop read 3:14 a.m. I'd been working for 6 hours, cross-referencing dates and building timelines. Sandra's story had its first crack, a hairline fracture, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. But I was looking. I thought about Adam's face at dinner, the casual way he'd discussed my death. I thought about Sandra pouring my whiskey like she still lived here, which technically she did, in a house I paid for and couldn't enter. I thought about 30 years of tracking money through shell companies, overseas accounts, and falsified receipts. I thought about the people who'd sat across from me in IRS interview rooms, sweating through their lies, convinced they'd outsmarted the system. None of them ever did. "First lie," I said to the empty apartment. "There will be others." I opened a new document and began to type. Not legal arguments. I'd leave those to a real lawyer once I found one. Instead, I typed questions. The questions I'd ask if this were an audit. The inconsistencies I'd probe. The places where the numbers didn't match the story. Sandra thought she knew me. She thought 8 years of living in my house, spending my tolerance, had taught her how I operated. But she'd only ever seen Kenneth, the husband. Kenneth, the father. Kenneth, the man who bought ice cream for a boy who threw sandwiches at ducks. She'd never seen Kenneth, the auditor. By morning, I had a list of 17 questions and a plan taking shape in my mind. I spent 3 days researching lawyers in Austin the way I used to research tax evaders, methodically, thoroughly, and without mercy. The first 2 attorneys I called wanted retainers of $15,000 just to review the case. The third didn't return my call. The fourth suggested I settle. "These family disputes rarely go well for the defendant, Mr. Watson." I thanked him for his time and crossed his name off my list. On day 3, I found Quinn Harper. Her profile on Avo showed a 4.9 rating out of 5 stars, with a specialization in property disputes and real estate litigation. The reviews used words like surgical, relentless, and worth every penny. One former client wrote, "She found holes in the opposing counsel's case that no one else would have seen." She charged $450 an hour. I made an appointment for the next morning. Her office was on the 12th floor of a glass tower on Congress Avenue, a different universe from Brian Mill's storage space above a dry cleaner. The receptionist offered me coffee in a ceramic mug, not a paper cup. The magazines on the waiting room table were current month, not last year. Quinn Harper was a woman in her early 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. She didn't smile when I entered, didn't offer pleasantries or small talk. She simply pointed to a chair across from her desk and said, "Sit, talk." I talked for 45 minutes. She interrupted twice, once to ask about the date of my divorce, once to clarify the exact wording of Adam's emotional distress claim. Otherwise, she listened in silence, making occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she spent another hour reading through the documents I'd brought, the lawsuit, Adam's separate filing, my calendar records, the hotel receipts from Dallas. Finally, she set down her pen and looked at me over her glasses. "Mr. Watson, your ex-wife made a mistake. Several mistakes, actually. Such as, she's claiming an oral promise regarding real estate. In Texas, that's governed by the statute of frauds. Any agreement to transfer interest in real property must be in writing to be enforceable. Her entire case rests on witnesses testifying to a verbal promise that, legally speaking, couldn't create an enforceable obligation even if it happened. But she has 3 witnesses. Witnesses who are apparently willing to perjure themselves by placing you at a location 200 miles from where you actually were." Quinn tapped the hotel receipt. "This is excellent documentation, but we need more. We need to prove not just that you weren't there, but that the promise was never made at all. How do we do that? We investigate. Your ex-wife and your son both have something to hide. Everyone does. We find it." She paused. "There's also something odd about your son's claim. He's suing for $200,000 in emotional distress damages, claiming childhood mistreatment. But he's 38 years old and has been living rent-free in your house for years. If the mistreatment was so severe, why didn't he leave?" It was the same question I'd been asking myself for a decade. "I'll need a private investigator," Quinn continued. "Someone who specializes in financial backgrounds. I have a recommendation. Kyle Jenkins, former Austin PD, now licensed PI. He charges $85 an hour. If your son is hiding assets or income, Kyle will find them. I hired Kyle Jenkins the next day. We met at Epoch Coffee on North Loop, his choice, a place where conversations blended into the ambient noise of espresso machines and laptop keyboards. Kyle was a stocky man with a military haircut and the watchful eyes of someone who'd spent years noticing things other people missed. He listened to my story without expression, then asked a single question. "What does your son do for work?" "Nothing stable. He's had maybe 15 jobs in 20 years. Never lasted more than 6 months at any of them. And yet he lives in an $800,000 house and drives a car you mentioned is relatively new. A 2022 Honda Accord. My car, technically. I let him use it." Kyle wrote something in a small notebook. "Interesting. I'll start with public records. Corporate filings, property records, anything with his name on it. Give me 2 weeks." While Kyle investigated, I did something I'd been putting off for 8 years. I went through my archives. In the closet of my apartment, I had 17 boxes of documents dating back to 1985. Tax returns, receipts, contracts, correspondence. Everything I'd ever signed, paid, or received, organized by year. My former colleagues at the IRS used to joke that I could reconstruct my entire life from paper trails. They weren't wrong. I started with 2017, the year of the divorce. Box by box, folder by folder, I searched for anything related to Sandra, to the house, to any agreement we might have made. On April 8th at 11:47 p.m., I found it. A manila envelope, tucked between tax documents and utility bills, labeled in my own handwriting, "Divorce Final." I didn't remember putting it there. I didn't remember what was inside. My hands were steady as I opened it, the hands of a man who had opened 10,000 suspicious documents in his career. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. I unfolded it and began to read. The document was dated August 22nd, 2017, 5 weeks after the date Sandra claimed I made my oral promise. It was a notarized statement, typed on legal paper, with Sandra's signature at the bottom. The notary's seal was from Travis County, Texas. The stamp was crisp and official. The text read, "I, Sandra Mitchell, hereby acknowledge and affirm that the property located at 4712 Willow Creek Drive, Austin, Texas, is the sole and separate property of Kenneth Watson, acquired by him prior to our marriage. I relinquish any and all claims to said property, now and in perpetuity." I read it 3 times. Then I sat down on my bedroom floor and laughed until my eyes watered. I remembered now. August 2017, the final weeks of our divorce negotiations. Sandra had wanted to avoid a court battle. Too painful, too public, she'd said. The deal was simple. She would sign a statement confirming the house was mine. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue the $45,000 she'd transferred from our joint account to her personal account the month before filing. I'd forgotten about this document. 8 years of distance had buried it under layers of newer papers. Sandra had clearly forgotten too, or assumed I'd thrown it away. She'd always criticized my habit of keeping useless papers. Turns out, no paper is useless if you wait long enough. The next morning, I brought the document to Quinn Harper. She examined it for 15 minutes, checking the notary seal, the signatures, the paper quality. "This is gold," she finally said. "Absolute gold. This single document destroys their entire case. Sandra signed a legal statement acknowledging your sole ownership, 5 weeks after she supposedly received a verbal promise that you'd give her the house." She set the paper down carefully. "But we're not going to use it yet." "Why not?" "Because right now they think they're winning. They think you're a confused old man with a bad lawyer and no evidence. Let them commit to their story, deepen their lies, involve more witnesses. The more they invest in this fraud, the harder they'll fall." It was a hunter's logic. Set the trap, bait it properly, and wait for the prey to walk in. "What about my son's lawsuit?" I asked. "That's where things get interesting." Quinn pulled a folder from her desk drawer. "Kyle Jenkins' preliminary report came this morning. Your son Adam has been busier than he let on." She handed me a printout. "A Delaware corporate filing for AW Commerce Solutions, LLC. Registered agent, Adam Watson. Formation date, March 2022. It's a dropshipping company, online retail, where the seller never handles inventory. Orders come in through a website, get forwarded to a supplier, who ships directly to the customer. Quinn flipped to the next page. AW Commerce Solutions processed approximately $178,000 in revenue last year. I stared at the number. My son, who couldn't hold a job, who'd borrowed $12,000 9 years ago and never paid it back, who was suing me for emotional damages, was running a business making nearly $200,000 a year. He's not reporting this income, I said. Not a penny of it. No Schedule C on his personal returns. No corporate tax filings for the LLC. Kyle found bank statements showing regular deposits from payment processors, Stripe, PayPal, but no corresponding tax documentation. I did the math automatically, the way I'd done it countless times in IRS interview rooms. $178,000 in unreported income, self-employment tax plus federal income tax at his bracket. He owes the IRS approximately $47,000, plus penalties and interest if they audit him. That's Kyle's estimate as well. Quinn closed the folder. Your son is suing you for childhood trauma while hiding a small fortune from the federal government. The irony is remarkable. I thought about Adam at that dinner table, telling me I should die faster, about the loans never repaid, jobs never kept, excuses never ending, the son who blamed me for every failure while secretly building a business he'd never mentioned. What do we do with this information? For now, nothing. We document everything and wait. When the time comes, we'll have options. Quinn stood, signaling the meeting was over. Mr. Watson, your ex-wife and son aren't just trying to take your assets. They fabricated evidence, recruited false witnesses, filed fraudulent claims. That's not a family dispute. That's a coordinated attack. She walked me to the door. I'm going to enjoy dismantling them. That night, I sat in my apartment with the notarized document before me. Austin's skyline glittered through the window. 10,000 lights, each one someone else's story. I thought about Sandra's confidence when she'd slid that envelope across my table. She'd been so certain I would crumble. Kyle Jenkins called just before midnight. Mr. Watson, I've got something else. Your son's been making payments. $3,000 a month to a Delaware address. Might have a silent partner. Want me to dig deeper? Yes, I said. Dig until you hit bedrock. I hung up and looked at the document again. Sandra's signature, neat and precise. The notary's seal, undeniable. She'd handed me the weapon that would end her case, and she didn't even remember doing it. The counterattack came on April 28th, exactly 3 weeks after I'd hired Quinn Harper. I was in my apartment, sorting through another box of old documents, when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Check your email. You've been served. The email contained a court filing from Victor Salazar, Sandra, and Adam's attorney. I'd researched him after seeing his name on their lawsuit. 45 years old, aggressive reputation, known in Austin legal circles as the Bulldog. He took cases on contingency, which meant he only got paid if he won. That made him dangerous. He had every incentive to fight dirty. The filing was a motion for lis pendens, a legal notice that freezes a property during litigation. Effectively, I could no longer sell, refinance, or transfer my house until the lawsuit was resolved. Salazar was locking down my assets before I could move them. It was a smart move, I had to admit. Aggressive, but smart. The kind of legal maneuver that tells your opponent you're not interested in negotiating. You're interested in winning. I forwarded the document to Quinn. Her response came within minutes. Expected. Don't worry. We'll handle it. But Salazar wasn't done. The next morning, I woke up to 17 text messages. Most were from former colleagues at the IRS, people I'd worked with for decades, people who had respected me. The messages all asked variations of the same question. Ken, is this true? Adam had posted on Facebook. The post was 3 paragraphs long, written with the practiced tone of someone who'd rehearsed their victimhood. He described growing up with an emotionally absent father who valued money over family. He talked about years of psychological manipulation and financial control tactics. He ended with a plea. I'm finally standing up for myself and my mother. If you've ever supported us, please share this story. 214 likes, 47 shares. Comments from Sandra's friends calling me a monster and a narcissist. One comment read, "So brave of you to speak your truth, Adam. Your father should be ashamed." Another said, "Praying for you and Sandra during this difficult time." I read through every word, every comment, every accusation. My hands were steady. My pulse didn't rise. I'd spent 30 years watching people lie professionally. Adam's Facebook post was amateur hour compared to the corporate fraudsters I'd interrogated, but it still hurt. Not the lies themselves, but the efficiency of them. How quickly people I'd known for years were willing to believe the worst about me, based on nothing but my son's carefully crafted narrative. 30 years of honest work and a single social media post could make strangers think I was a villain. My phone rang, a number I recognized, Martha Chen, my former supervisor at the IRS Austin office. "Kenneth," she said carefully, "I saw Adam's post. I wanted to ask you directly. Is any of this true?" "No, Martha, none of it." A pause. "Okay, I believe you. But you should know. People are talking. Some of them aren't sure what to think." "Let them talk," I said. "The truth will come out in court." Quinn Harper called an hour later. "I saw the Facebook post. Don't respond publicly. Anything you say can be used against you. Instead, we are going to respond, legally." She filed 2 motions that afternoon. The first was a counterclaim to validate the 2017 notarized document, a formal request for the court to recognize Sandra's written acknowledgement that the house was my sole property. The second was a defamation lawsuit against Adam. $50,000 in damages for the Facebook post. In Texas, defamation per se applies when someone falsely accuses another of criminal conduct or moral turpitude. Adam's post accused me of psychological abuse. That qualified. "This will get their attention," Quinn said. "They thought you'd fold. They thought you'd accept some settlement to make the embarrassment go away. Now they know you're fighting back." But I had one more card to play. That evening, I sat at my laptop and opened the IRS whistleblower submission portal. Form 211, Application for Award for Original Information. The form allows citizens to report tax fraud and potentially receive a percentage of any taxes recovered. I filled it out carefully, the way I'd taught hundreds of agents to do over 3 decades. Adam's name, his LLC, the unreported income, the estimated tax liability of $47,000. This wasn't revenge. This was the law. Adam had evaded taxes on nearly $200,000. Any citizen who discovered that information had a legal right, arguably a duty, to report it. I submitted the form at 11:47 p.m. and closed my laptop. Outside my window, Austin was still awake. Traffic sounds, distant music, the hum of a city that never quite slept. Quinn called the next morning, her voice tight. "Victor Salazar just contacted me. He says, and I quote, 'Your client wants a war? He'll get one. We found a 4th witness.'" The 4th witness was Karen Rogers. I knew Karen. She'd lived next door to us on Willow Creek Drive for 15 years, a pleasant woman in her late 50s who'd always waved from her porch and brought over Christmas cookies. She'd moved to a condo near downtown after her husband passed in 2020. According to Salazar's filing, Karen was prepared to testify under oath that she'd overheard a conversation between Sandra and me in the summer of 2017. Specifically, she claimed she'd heard me say, "This house is yours, Sandra. I'm leaving it to you." Quinn Harper studied the deposition notice with narrowed eyes. "Another witness placing you at a conversation that allegedly happened on July 15th, 2017, the same date you were 200 miles away in Dallas." "Karen wasn't part of Sandra's book club," I said. "She barely knew those women, which makes her more credible than the other 3, a neighbor with no obvious connection to the plaintiff." Quinn set the paper down. "We need to investigate her. Kyle Jenkins should start immediately." Kyle's report came back in 10 days. Karen Rogers owed Sandra $8,500, a personal loan from 2019, documented in a text message exchange Kyle had obtained through legal discovery. Karen had promised to repay it as soon as I get back on my feet. 4 years later, she hadn't paid back a penny. "That's motive," Quinn said, tapping the printout with satisfaction. "She lies for Sandra. Sandra forgives the debt. Classic quid pro quo." But there was something else bothering me. I remembered that summer of 2017, the weeks before the divorce was finalized. Sandra and I had argued on the porch one evening. Karen had been watering her lawn next door. She could have overheard us. But what had I actually said? I closed my eyes and tried to reconstruct the memory. The heat of that July evening, Sandra's tears, real ones that time, or at least convincing, my own exhaustion after months of negotiations, and then, yes, I remembered my exact words. This house is everything I have left, Sandra. I'm not leaving it to you. Not, I'm leaving it to you. The opposite. One word changed and the entire meaning reversed. Karen had either misheard or was deliberately lying. Given the $8,500 debt, I knew which option was more likely. Quinn filed a subpoena for Karen Rogers' financial records on May 25th. We would see exactly what Sandra had paid her and when. 4 days later, my phone rang at 7:14 a.m. The caller ID showed Adam Watson. I answered. "Hello, Adam." "Dad." His voice was different than I'd ever heard it, tight, strained, with an edge of panic underneath the words. "Dad, I just got a letter from the IRS. They're auditing me. They're auditing my business." I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, then 10. I could hear him breathing on the other end, waiting for me to say something, anything. "Adam, I worked at the IRS for 30 years. I know, that's why I'm calling. Did you do this? Did you report me? If I wanted to hurt you, son, you'd already be in prison. The IRS doesn't need my help to find unreported income. They have algorithms for that. Software that flags discrepancies between payment processor records and tax filings." "This is insane. They're asking for 3 years of records, bank statements, invoices, everything." "Then I suggest you find a good tax attorney. The penalties for willful failure to file can be severe. We're talking about 25% of the unpaid tax, plus interest, plus potential criminal charges if they determine intent." "Dad, please. You sued me for emotional abuse, Adam. You told the internet I was a monster. You're trying to take my house, my cars, my retirement." I kept my voice calm, almost pleasant. "And now you're asking me for help because the consequences of your own choices are catching up with you." The line went silent. When Adam spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "Did you do this?" "Goodbye, Adam." I hung up and set the phone on my kitchen table. My coffee was still warm. The morning light filtered through the blinds. It was a beautiful day. Quinn Harper called that afternoon with news of her own. "We have a problem, Mr. Watson. I just found out who's been assigned to your case. Judge Harold Pierce." "Is that significant?" Judge Pierce and Victor Salazar play golf together. At least 12 times in the past 2 years. Kyle found photos on Instagram. They're not just acquaintances. They're friends. I absorbed this information the way I'd absorbed 1,000 unexpected complications in audit cases. Calmly, analytically. Can we request a different judge? We can file a motion for recusal based on conflict of interest. But it's risky. Judges don't like being accused of bias. If the motion fails, Pierce might hold it against us throughout the trial. What are our chances if we don't file? Quinn's pause told me everything. With Pierce on the bench and Salazar as opposing counsel? Not good. They'll know each other's strategies. They'll have a rapport that we can't match. I thought about Sandra and Adam, confident in their lies. About Victor Salazar, building his case on fabricated evidence and purchased witnesses. About a system that was supposed to deliver justice, but was riddled with personal connections and quiet favors. "File the motion," I said. "Let's see if the system can be made to work honestly." The motion to recuse Judge Harold Pierce was filed on June 18, 2025. Quinn Harper had compiled a meticulous dossier, 12 photographs from Victor Salazar's Instagram account showing him and Judge Pierce on various golf courses around Austin. Timestamps, location tags, comments from mutual friends joking about their Wednesday tradition. One photo caption read, "Another great round with my favorite judge. Harold owes me $20. This is either going to work brilliantly or blow up in our faces," Quinn said as she submitted the filing. Judges protect their own. Pierce might have friends on the review panel. The response came faster than either of us expected. 3 days later, the Travis County District Court issued a ruling. Judge Harold Pierce was removed from Watson v. Watson due to the appearance of impropriety. The case was reassigned to Judge Elizabeth Carter. I researched Judge Carter that same evening. 58 years old, appointed to the bench in 2009, known for her no-nonsense demeanor and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. One legal blog described her as the judge who makes lawyers wish they'd prepared better. Another called her brutally fair. She'll rule against you if you're wrong, no matter how sympathetic your story is. Quinn was pleased. Carter doesn't play favorites. She follows the law and the evidence. That's exactly what we need. But Salazar wasn't giving up. The day after the reassignment, he filed a motion to dismiss our defamation counterclaim, arguing that Adam's Facebook post was protected opinion rather than actionable defamation. Quinn shot it down in her response brief, citing 3 Texas precedents where similar posts had been ruled defamatory. Judge Carter denied Salazar's motion in 48 hours. Meanwhile, the IRS audit was tightening around Adam like a slowly closing fist. I heard about his troubles secondhand. Kyle Jenkins had contacts who could track court filings and financial movements without breaking any laws. By late June, Adam had hired a tax attorney. The attorney had reviewed his records and delivered the bad news. Adam owed $47,000 in back taxes, plus $14,100 in penalties and interest. Total, $61,100. Due by October 15th. His dropshipping business had essentially collapsed. According to Kyle, Adam hadn't processed a single order in 3 weeks. He was too distracted by the audit, too consumed by damage control, to actually run his company. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, just the cold clarity of watching consequences unfold. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for July 15th, exactly 8 years to the day after the oral promise Sandra claimed I had made. The irony was not lost on me. I arrived at the Travis County Courthouse at 8:45 a.m., wearing the same gray suit I'd worn to hundreds of IRS interviews. Quinn Harper met me in the hallway outside courtroom 4B. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Ready," I said. I'd been ready for months. Sandra and Adam were already inside, seated at the plaintiff's table with Victor Salazar. Sandra wore a pale blue dress, soft, feminine, designed to make her look vulnerable. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled back simply. She looked like a woman who had been crying. The performance was flawless. I almost admired it. Adam sat beside her, stiff and pale. He'd lost weight since I'd last seen him. The stress of the lawsuit and the audit carving lines into his face that hadn't been there before. He didn't look at me when I entered. Judge Carter called the hearing to order at precisely 9 a.m. Salazar went first, presenting his case with the confidence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. The oral promise, the witnesses, the alleged pattern of financial control during my marriage to Sandra. Then Quinn stood up. "Your Honor, before we proceed, the defense would like to address a matter of evidence." She held up a manila folder. "We have documentation proving that on July 15th, 2017, the date the plaintiff claims the oral promise was made, the defendant was 200 miles away, attending a professional conference in Dallas." She handed copies to the judge and to Salazar. I watched his face as he read, the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible pause before he continued breathing normally. "These are hotel receipts, conference registration records, and credit card statements," Quinn continued. "They establish beyond any reasonable doubt that Mr. Watson could not have been present for the conversation Ms. Mitchell describes." Judge Carter examined the documents. "Mr. Salazar? Response?" Salazar recovered quickly. "Your Honor, the plaintiff may have been mistaken about the exact date. The substance of the promise is what matters." "The substance of a promise that allegedly occurred on a specific date?" Judge Carter's voice was dry. "A date that has been central to the plaintiff's entire filing?" Sandra's composure flickered. Just for a moment, a quick glance at Salazar, a flash of something that might have been fear. It was the first crack in her perfect facade, and I intended to make it wider. The subpoena results arrived on July 2nd, exactly 1 week after the preliminary hearing. Quinn Harper spread the documents across her conference table, like a surgeon laying out instruments, bank statements, transaction records, wire transfers, Karen Rogers' entire financial history for the past 3 years. "Look at this." Quinn pointed to a highlighted entry from March 12th, 2025. Sandra Mitchell transferred $3,000 to Karen Rogers, 1 week after filing the lawsuit against you. I leaned forward. The transfer was labeled gift in the memo line. That's not a gift, I said. That's payment. It gets better. Quinn flipped to another page. Karen also received $1,500 from Sandra in April and another $2,000 in May. Total, $6,500, in addition to the original $8,500 debt that Karen already owed. Sandra was paying her witness, I said, and doing it badly. Every transaction is documented. Every payment leaves a trail. Quinn smiled, a thin, predatory expression that reminded me why I'd hired her. But the real prize is here. She handed me a printout of text messages. Kyle Jenkins had obtained them through legal discovery. Sandra and Karen discussing their arrangement in language that was damning without being explicitly criminal. One message from Sandra, dated March 10th, stood out. Ken will never find that document. I'm sure he threw it out years ago. He never kept anything important. She was talking about the notarized statement from 2017, the document she'd signed acknowledging my sole ownership of the house, the document she'd assumed I'd discarded, the document that was now the centerpiece of our defense. She knew, I said quietly, she knew the document existed, and she bet everything on me not having kept it. She underestimated you, Quinn said. Most people do. The confrontation with Adam came 2 weeks later. I was in my apartment on a Saturday afternoon, working on a pocket watch, a 1938 Hamilton that needed a new mainspring. The knock on my door was aggressive, demanding. I opened it to find my son standing in the hallway, his face flushed with anger. Can I help you, Adam? You destroyed my life. His voice was shaking. The IRS audit. That was you. I know it was you. The IRS audits thousands of businesses every year. Most of them don't take it personally. I have to pay $61,000. $61,000. I don't have that kind of money. Then perhaps you shouldn't have hidden $107,000 in unreported income. Adam's hands clenched into fists. For a moment I thought he might swing at me. Part of me almost hoped he would. Assault charges would make an excellent addition to our countersuit. But he controlled himself. Barely. I'll drop the lawsuit, he said. Everything. Mom's case, my case, all of it. Just help me with the IRS. You know people. You can make this go away. I studied my son, this 38-year-old man who had never held a job for more than 6 months, who had borrowed money he never repaid, who had told me I should die faster so he could inherit my assets. Adam, do you know why I spent 30 years at the IRS? He blinked, confused by the change in direction. What? Because I believe in fairness, in consequences, in the idea that everyone, rich or poor, powerful or ordinary, has to play by the same rules. I leaned against the door frame, keeping my voice conversational. You broke those rules, you hid income, you evaded taxes, and then you sued me for made-up trauma to try to take what I'd earned honestly, and now you want me to fix it for you. Dad, you didn't come here because you're sorry. You came because you're losing. I stepped back and began to close the door. The answer is no. You'll regret this. Adam's voice cracked with desperation. Mom has something else, something that'll change everything. A letter you wrote her, promising the house. I paused. A letter? From 2016, in your handwriting. She's been saving it for the right moment. Adam's smile was ugly, triumphant, despite his fear. You think you've won? You haven't seen anything yet. I closed the door in his face and listened to his footsteps retreat down the hallway. Then I called Quinn Harper. They have something new, I said. A letter, supposedly from me, dated 2016. Quinn's voice was sharp. Did you write any such letter? Never. Not a word. Then it's either a forgery or a fabrication. A pause, which means they're getting desperate enough to manufacture evidence. This could be very good for us, or very dangerous. I'll have Kyle look into it immediately. I hung up and looked at the pocket watch on my workbench, the old Hamilton with its broken mainspring waiting to be repaired. Everything breaks eventually. The trick is knowing which pieces can be fixed and which ones were broken from the start. The letter arrived at Quinn Harper's office on September 8th, delivered by Victor Salazar, with all the theatrical flourish of a man presenting his winning hand. Quinn called me immediately. You need to see this. I drove to her office on Congress Avenue, the late summer heat rising from the Austin pavement in visible waves. Inside, Quinn had the letter spread out on her conference table, handling it with latex gloves as if it were evidence at a crime scene, which I suspected it might become. Supposedly written by you in December 2016, she said, addressed to Sandra. It says, and I quote, "I promise that after my death, the house at 4712 Willow Creek Drive will be yours. This is my gift to you for the years we shared together." I looked at the letter. The handwriting was a reasonable approximation of mine. Someone had clearly studied my signature, but I knew I hadn't written these words. I had never made such a promise, never even considered it. The signature, I said. Look at the way the K connects to the E in Kenneth. I haven't written my name that way in decades. I changed my signature style around 2005 after a seminar on document security. I noticed the same thing. Quinn pointed to a section at the bottom. And the paper. Feel how crisp it is. This is supposed to be 9 years old. Paper that age shows wear, yellowing, the faint brittleness of oxidation. This looks like it was printed last month. Because it probably was. Quinn nodded slowly. I'm sending it to a forensic document examiner, Dr. Margaret Chen. She's testified in over 200 cases, unimpeachable credentials. If this is a forgery, she'll prove it. The wait was agonizing. 3 weeks of uncertainty while Dr. Chen conducted her analysis. 3 weeks of knowing that Sandra had produced a document I'd never written, but not being able to prove it. I spent those weeks organizing my evidence, preparing for trial, and trying not to think about what would happen if the expert couldn't definitively prove the forgery. The results came back on October 2nd. Dr. Chen's report was devastating for Sandra. The signature had been digitally copied from a check I'd written in 2018, then printed onto the letter. The analysis showed telltale signs of digital manipulation, pixel artifacts, inconsistent ink density, and a slight geometric distortion that occurs when images are resized. More damning still, the paper itself contained optical brighteners that weren't commercially available until 2022. Sandra had forged a document. She hadn't just lied. She hadn't just recruited false witnesses and bribed them with money. She had manufactured physical evidence and submitted it to a court of law. This was no longer a civil dispute about property. This was criminal fraud. This is fraud upon the court, Quinn said, her voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. A felony in Texas. If we report this to the district attorney, Sandra could face up to 2 years in prison. What are our options? We can offer Salazar a choice. Withdraw all claims immediately and we don't pursue criminal charges. Or we go to trial, present this evidence, and let the DA decide whether to prosecute. I thought about Sandra, the woman I'd married, the mother of my son, the person who had shared my bed for over 20 years. I thought about the calculated cruelty of her plan, the false witnesses, the lies about oral promises, and now a forged document designed to steal everything I'd built. Give Salazar 48 hours to respond, I said. Then we go to trial, regardless. Quinn delivered the ultimatum on October 3rd. The deadline passed on October 5th without a response. On the morning of October 6th, Quinn received a text message from Victor Salazar. We're going to the end. See you in court. I read the message over her shoulder. He thinks he can still win. He thinks he has nothing to lose, Quinn corrected. He's on contingency. If they lose, he doesn't get paid regardless. And Sandra is too committed to her lies to back down now. When's the trial? October 20th. Judge Carter moved it up. She doesn't like cases that drag on. Quinn gathered her files. Mr. Watson, I've been a lawyer for 27 years. I've never seen anyone walk into a courtroom with forged evidence that's already been exposed. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Kyle Jenkins delivered his final reports. Quinn rehearsed her arguments. I organized every piece of evidence into chronological order. On October 19th, the night before the trial, I sat alone and looked at Sandra's notarized statement from 2017. The document that would end her lawsuit and possibly send her to prison. I felt no triumph, only the cold understanding that some things, once broken, cannot be repaired. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom and watch Sandra's world collapse, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with the quiet certainty that justice, however imperfect, still meant something. The Travis County Courthouse stood at 1000 Guadalupe Street, a building that had seen thousands of disputes resolved within its walls. On October 20th, 2025, it would see the end of Watson versus Watson. I arrived at courtroom 4B at 8:30 a.m. Quinn Harper was already there, her files arranged with surgical precision. Across the aisle, Victor Salazar sat with Sandra and Adam. Karen Rogers and the other witnesses occupied the gallery benches behind them. Sandra wore black, a strategic choice, the grieving ex-wife, the victim. Adam's face was pale, the weight of the IRS debt and the collapsing lawsuit etched into every line around his eyes. He looked like a man who had finally realized he was going to lose. Judge Elizabeth Carter called the court to order at precisely 9 a.m. Salazar presented his case first, confident, articulate, weaving a narrative of a generous wife betrayed by a cold husband. He called his witnesses, the book club friends who claimed they'd heard promises, Karen Rogers, who testified about the conversation on the porch. Then he presented the letter. Your Honor, the plaintiff submits Exhibit F, a letter written by the defendant in 2016, clearly stating his intention to leave the property to Ms. Mitchell. Quinn rose. Your Honor, the defense has serious concerns about the authenticity of this document. We request the opportunity to present expert testimony. Granted, Quinn called Dr. Margaret Chen to the stand. For 45 minutes, the forensic document examiner methodically dismantled the letter, the copied signature, the digital artifacts, the paper that couldn't have existed in 2016. I watched Salazar's face as she spoke. The color drained slowly, like water from a bathtub. His pen stopped moving. His shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. Sandra sat frozen across the aisle. Her carefully constructed mask was cracking piece by piece. In your expert opinion, Quinn asked, is this letter genuine? No, Dr. Chen said. This letter is a forgery created no earlier than 2022. The courtroom went silent. I could hear the air conditioning humming in the ceiling. Quinn picked up the final exhibit. Your Honor, the defense submits Exhibit G, a notarized statement signed by Sandra Mitchell on August 22, 2017. She handed copies to the judge and Salazar. I watched him read it. His face went from pale to ashen gray. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the page. This document shows that Ms. Mitchell acknowledged in writing, 5 weeks after the alleged oral promise, that the property at 4712 Willow Creek Drive belongs solely to Kenneth Watson. She signed it. It was witnessed. It was notarized by a licensed official. Judge Carter looked at Sandra. Ms. Mitchell, did you sign this document? Sandra's voice was barely audible. I was under duress. Kenneth forced me. The notary testified in a deposition that Ms. Mitchell appeared voluntarily and was fully informed of the document's contents. Quinn interrupted smoothly. Sandra's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Her eyes darted to Adam, to Salazar, looking for help that wasn't coming. For the first time since the lawsuit began, she had nothing to say. Judge Carter announced her ruling at 11:47 a.m. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. The defendant's counterclaim for defamation is granted. Adam Watson is ordered to pay $50,000 in damages. Additionally, the court is referring evidence of document forgery to the Travis County District Attorney for potential criminal prosecution. I stood up from the defense table. Sandra was crying. Real tears this time, not the calculated manipulation I'd seen so many times before. These were the tears of someone who had finally run out of lies. Adam stared straight ahead, his face blank with shock. I walked toward them. Salazar stepped between us, but I wasn't there to gloat. I had only one thing to say. I spent 30 years catching people who thought they were smarter than the system. My voice was calm, almost gentle. You weren't even a challenge. I turned and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. 1 month later, I moved back into my house on Willow Creek Drive. Sandra had vacated within a week of the ruling. The district attorney's investigation was ongoing, and she'd relocated to stay with her sister in Houston. Adam had disappeared somewhere, scraping together money for the IRS debt and the $50,000 he now owed me. I found my workshop exactly as I'd left it. The 1942 Elgin pocket watch was still on the bench, waiting. I sat down, picked up my tools, and began to work. Numbers never lie. People lie constantly, creatively, with tremendous confidence. But if you're patient enough, careful enough, willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads, the truth always comes out. I finished the repair as afternoon sun slanted through my workshop window. The watch ticked steadily, keeping perfect time after 8 decades of silence. I smiled, not because I had won, but because justice still existed for those willing to fight for it. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.